Thank you all for coming to our Mental Health Symposium. I'd like to thank everybody who is up here. We have 2 students from Legend, we have 2 wonderful principals, and we have 3 fantastic mental health professionals. And we're going to use this as more of a discussion. They're going to talk about the environments that the students are in, how parents can help, how parents can partner, what the role of parents is with an issue like this, and kind of give really an overview as to what students today are constantly having to deal with from a mental health perspective. So some of it is probably going to be very eye-opening, and that's the intent. So without further ado, let's kick this off. And everybody, I would like you to begin with introducing yourself and giving your name and school background, whatever you'd like to add.
I'm Evan Prihodko. I'm a student, a senior at Legend High School.
I'm Molly McCord. I'm also a senior at Legend High School.
Sid Rundle, and I'm the principal of Crest Hill Middle School right next door.
Chris Page, I'm principal of the Highlands Ranch High School, where you're sitting right now.
Great. I'm Simone Gallick. I'm a child and family therapist at All Health Network, and I also do school-based therapy at Sierra Middle School in Pine Lane.
I'm Dennis Ballinger. I'm the Director of Addiction and Forensic Services at All Health Network. Just before I took on that role, I was the manager for the Child and Family Program, and I've been working with children and families and substance use issues for over 18 years now.
That sounds fancy.
Thanks.
I'm John Rudersdorf. I'm a child psychiatrist. I work down at All Health. From Nebraska, went to medical school in Omaha at Creighton, lived in St. Louis for a long time, doing fellowship and residency down there, and then came up here a couple of years ago. I've been working with All Health since.
From one Nebraska person to another. All right, Laurie, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Laurie Eliot. I'm also with All Health Network, but my favorite hat is I'm a parent. I have 3 kids who have gone through Douglas County Schools, so I could be sitting right next to you. Those kids went from K through 12, and then our youngest is halfway through. So my passion being here is not only as a parent, but also as a member of All Health Network. I have the privilege of being a licensed clinical social worker, but also the Vice President of Outpatient Services at All Health. And I just want to start with a little bit of an introduction about All Health, because we have been in this community for 60 years. I haven't worked there quite that long, but we've been there a long time, and a lot of people have never heard of us. So let me give just a short spiel. Our given name is Arapahoe Mental Health Center, and over the years we've changed names due to different changes in the community. We used to be a catchmented area, et cetera. So we changed our name about a year ago, and the other advantage to that is it helps decrease stigma. So what we do is we serve kids of all ages. I say 2 to 102. We serve individuals with minor challenges in life to very severe, excuse me, challenges in life. But one of our core missions is to provide counseling and psychiatric services. So that's why we're here tonight. We have locations in Parker. If you're from there, it's kitty corner from the field house. We have a location in Castle Rock, which is near Douglas County Fairgrounds. We have a location downtown Littleton, a location closer to you all in Littleton on Broadway and Arapahoe Road. And then we have what we call the Pink Palace on I-25 in Dry Creek. There's a 3-story ugly rose-colored building that we refer to as the Pink Palace. So we're in 5 different major locations for our outpatient services. And we serve about 14,000 folks in a year. About 3,000 plus of those are children and youth. So, as Kathy said, our goal tonight is to start a conversation about mental illness and challenges that we face, whether we have just minor challenges going on in our life or more severe. We will also touch on drug and alcohol challenges because those 2 things go together often. So, as she said, we've got great panelists here who will answer a lot of questions, but we also want to stress that this is a time for you to ask questions as well. So feel free to be thinking about those, and we will give you an opportunity to do that at the end. So how this is going to go is I will ask each person one or two questions, and then they will give you their wisdom from their expertise. Okay? So, Evan, no pressure. We're going to start with you. Here we go. And Molly, too, you guys don't have to, yeah, I'll hand you this in a second, too, if you each want to have a microphone. There you go. So we're asking you, what do you see day to day? What do you see at home? What do you see in your neighborhood? What do you see in your classrooms? What do you see in the school related to mental health and drug abuse and use? And then also, we have parents in the audience that you have the opportunity to give wisdom to. So if you were saying, this is what I think teens our age need, what would you tell those parents?
Well, I'll just start off. A lot of the stuff that I see day to day regarding mental health is not really very large psychological or important psychological disorders, but mostly mild, I'd say, anxiety, which can really get the best of some students. That can lead to a lot of examples of anxiety that I see is, empty threats of skipping, ditching class, especially around when there's a test someday or some important assignment due. I know I'm guilty of that for some days, not very many, of course, because I don't want to get too behind, but especially with the upperclassmen years, I see a lot more that students are starting to ditch class more. They're starting to become more absent, have more absences appear on their transcript. And of course, this highly contagious senioritis disease could also be one of the culprits of this, but I know this definitely plays a role in that. And another big factor that students usually like to do to, I guess, hide from the anxiety or try and shy away from it. As I said, ditching class, but sleep deprivation can also play a big role. I know there's rarely times, especially on the weekends, where I get enough sleep. Maybe I'd say 5 to 6 hours at most, when I feel like I should be getting 8 or 9 from how easily I wake up in the morning. There's always many different reasons that I could just think of in the last couple minutes for stress, from college applications this year, maintaining relationships between friends, homework, family problems, or just problems at home in general, sports, community service hour activities, getting those in are a big issue. And I'm in several different honor societies, so added on to those community service hours, I also have to do many more just to actually core at graduation. I know, as she mentioned, that with in terms of the relationship of stress and anxiety and mental health to drugs and alcohol, I know some students that I've noticed with low character or self-esteem or inability to handle stress correctly do resort to drugs such as marijuana, I see most commonly, or alcohol to cope with that. But in terms of commonality or how often that happens, I don't see that very much.
I see mostly like it's gotten worse as I've gotten older in the school, and I've seen a lot more of the darker side of it. A lot of times in the hallways, you'll hear kids threatening to, like if they don't want to do something, they'll just threaten to kill themselves so they can get out of it. And it is not a laughing matter, because at this point, you don't know who's serious about it and who's not. Like, it scares me that some days I can come back to, like, every day I don't know if I'm going to come back to school tomorrow and everyone that was there the day before is going to be still alive. Suicide rates have gone up exponentially over the years, and it's not something that should be overlooked. Depression and anger and anxiety is not just a characteristic of a teenager. It is actually a mental disorder and needs to be addressed. Just because you're 18 doesn't mean you can be sad all the time. It's something that needs to be looked at. Your honors AP kids are the ones that usually get hit pretty hard with it, because I sleep 4 hours a night, like regardless of the day of the week, because of how many different AP classes I'm in, and it's just become my routine. But I honestly do think I should be getting 8 to 9 hours of sleep. it's caused just self-esteem levels to go just to plummet between everyone, and really it's hard to see truly happy kids at school anymore. A big thing is parents not being home. My mom says all the time that, like, if I was suicidal or depressed, she'd notice. But I'm not home, and my parents aren't home enough for her to notice something like that. It's not normal to sit down every night to have a family dinner anymore. It's become something, a social norm is eating out, or a lot of times it's sports and practices and everything else that happens. You don't see your parents as much as you should. And that strays from the ability of these signs to be seen, especially since we don't have anyone in high schools to go to if we're having these issues.
Yeah, I mean, everything she said I completely agree with, and I've seen day to day as well. I think, so to move on to the second question, which is what would you like parents to understand? What would we like parents to understand about the environment? And what do we think that students need from them? In my personal opinion, I feel parents should know when to push their kids, because from a young age, my parents have always been pushing me to realize, like, okay, you're doing a good job, but I also want you never to be satisfied with where you're at. You can always keep growing. You can always keep doing better. There's always more to do. But also know when to hold back, because school is a very stressful environment, but it's nothing that they can't handle. It's manageable, and they can do it. And at some times, I know with the hormones flooding, rushing through, it seems like, okay, this is too much. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this, but they just have to reinforce, because it's always nice to have somebody else to talk to, especially a family member that they're close to, that I can do this, and I may need your help at some times, even though I may not be able to admit it, but I can do this, and I want you to be there with me, basically. A couple hours ago, I went to a pizza restaurant, but about the restaurant, it had quotes all over the wall, and one of the quotes on the walls that I was looking at that I thought was very interesting, that applies to this conference right now, is when you get to the end of your rope, tie a knot and hold on. I don't know exactly who said it, but I thought it was very relevant to this conversation and pretty much to everything that I'm going through right now. That when I feel like giving up, or when I'm just at the end of my rope, as it said, I have to hold on.
I think that parents need to know the signs and symptoms of suicide and depression, and that they need to be less on top of kids' academics and more make sure that they're okay mentally and emotionally. Like, I am going to graduate with a 4.2 valedictorian. I'm in all the honor societies, and I mean, I've struggled with mental health in my high school career, and that was something that I had to address, because my parents just thought it was a side effect of my academics, which it wasn't. It was something very much more important and different. And granted, it's not their fault. It's no one's fault. It's just something that needs to be brought up. As I said before, it is not something that is a characteristic of a teenager. It is something so much more. And even one life nowadays is worth being saved just by it's one act that could save your kid's life.
Nicely done. They're a tough act to follow. Good luck, guys. Okay, so thank you very much for that. You're not done, but you did good. Okay, the principals. What are you seeing in the schools regarding mental health challenges and drug use? What resources do we have in the schools? And by the way, as a parent, I feel like I want to share this. I'm not connected with the school district in any way. My personal belief is that it's not the school district's responsibility, it's our responsibility as parents. The school's partnering with us, thankfully. They're really good at that because they love our kids as much as we do. And so I'm not saying that, but we do have some resources in the school, so if you'll touch on that, that would be great. And then what do you see are the differences between, we went to school a couple years ago, so what we experienced when we were in middle and high school is different than our kids are being challenged with these days. So if you could touch on any of that, that'd be great.
You bet. So, first off, I think, is this on?
Here, on this one.
There we go. Got it pushed down. Molly, did you get it? First off, I want to say, Evan and Molly, really appreciate you. I think you framed up our conversation and our discussion so beautifully, and really set the table for the discussion. Thank you for that very much, and for your candor and honesty. As principals, I think Chris and I can speak to, certainly at the secondary level, middle and high, what we're seeing, and we're talking roughly the age group of 12 to 17. Yep. Yeah, 12 to 18 years old, which is where a lot of the mental health issues really come into some of their full bloom. And so as school administrators, that's certainly very much the context we live in. I think at the outset of the discussion, it's worth saying it's difficult to even engage in this type of a conversation from the pure footing of, I'm not sure we adequately define mental health. I'm not sure I don't know that we always mean the same thing when we talk about mental health or mental illness. And so until we really even begin to get more comfortable grappling with terms and definitions and where on the continuum are we talking about, sometimes we can have entire conversations about a problem and realize we're talking about two different things entirely. And I think Evan and Molly did a nice job of framing that up. As an administrator, I'm very, very cognizant of the fact that I see, not to oversimplify it, but there's two very distinct breeds of mental health challenges that I face. One is the obvious, far more deep dive types of mental health issues, when we do have kids that have very, very serious, psychotic challenges, very, very serious episodes of suicide and depression and things that, rise to a very, very high level. And quite honestly, as a school, we're often in a very reactive posture. What do we do as well? This is beyond our scope and our expertise. But the other sort of flavor of mental health issues that I think are that Molly and Evan really surfaced that are really, really compelling to me as an administrator are what we're seeing at that more generalized level of the health of our kids, the health of our society, the health of our community in general. And we refer to it as mental health because it affects them cognitively, emotionally, socially, physically. And so we have no better language for it but to call it mental health issues. No question, as a principal, as an administrator, I've been in leadership position in a building for a little over 10 years. And during that 10 years, I've seen dramatic shifts and changes. We've always had the deeper challenges. Those are always there and will always continue to be there. But I've most definitely witnessed and seen as a principal a significant increase in, as Molly and Evan mentioned, things like anxiety, fragility, just kids being incredibly fragile, falling to pieces. We see a lot more occurrence of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, than we've ever seen before. We see a lot of avoidance behavior. I can't tell you the number of avoidance, meaning attendance issues, as you guys talked about. Kids just flat out, the number of calls I get each year of saying, Principal Rundle, I need you to come out to the car and physically convince my kid to come into your school. And she just is overwhelmed, can't cope with the idea of coming to school. We're seeing much more of that today than we did, say, 10 years ago. And the absenteeism is through the roof as well. I mean, kids that are literally missing 40% of the days at school. We're going to hear from the people that are certainly much more of the experts as to some of the etiology of it, as well as some of the deeper areas of it. I can just speak from the principal perspective of the impact that it's having on our kids. The research seems to be very, very clear to me that the writings and the people that are doing a lot of work in this is it really seems to come down to some pretty large societal and cultural shifts in our approaches to parenting. And as a parent, I have to say that to myself. This is not parents versus schools. I'm a parent, and I know, and I see this in my own two boys, and my own struggles with my colleagues and my neighbors and my friends, and how we parent and the messages that we think are ubiquitous and acceptable, but I think are actually really setting our kids up. And you know, we can certainly get into some of that conversation, but suffice it to say, I think it's definitely a conversation that as educators we're longing to have with our parents, to say, can we all get on the same page with this? What do we need to be doing together? Because what we're doing now, and I'm not talking about every family, I'm just talking about a very large context, what we're doing now is not working very well. The rates of, as you guys talked about, self-harm that are happening in my building, the rates of suicide ideation, the rates of depression, the rates of avoidance are things that we are completely overwhelmed with at the school, with a social worker and a part-time psychologist and a couple of counselors trying to help kids. So that's at a very, very superficial level, but there's no question that's what we're seeing in middle school.
And the only other thing I would add is, one of the things that I think we see a lot of is a lack of communication. If I was to sum it all up into some of those pieces, okay. There is a large lack of communication that seems to be happening between kids and parents, between any adult and kids, and sometimes between all adults, right? How do we actually communicate with each other and work with each other towards a common goal? I'll use a personal story. I'm also a parent. My daughter is 11 years old, now I'm about to have a teenager, all those scary things. But one of the things that stood out to me more than almost anything else is I think I'm a pretty good communicator. I think I talk to her a lot. We talk about how life is, all those kind of things. And often the communication that I think our kids get today are really built into the big bad monster, social media, right? That's where they're getting their communication from. That's where they're getting communicated to of how to act, how to respond, what those key things are to say to people, what those key triggers are, and what's acceptable. And we got to take those things back from social media in some regards, because those aren't the appropriate ways to respond. And once again, I use my daughter as an example because we limit her social media, all those things, but she does watch television. Well, about 3.5 years ago, she got in a fight with her mom, daughters and moms, so they're bumping heads, it's fine. She's upset, and she does the traditional thing that kids do. She stomps up the stairs to go to her room, because go to your room. And so she's stomping up the stairs, and I'm like, don't you stomp up those stairs, and she's just her mom's like, and don't you slam that door. I am tired of you slamming the door. And she goes, I just want to kill myself, and goes into her room. So, I mean, I'm in this profession, so I've seen where this can end up. So at that time, I told my wife, I was like, time out. And I walk up there, and I open up the door, and she's bawling. And she's like, well, Mom, da-da. And I had to say, stop. What would ever make you think saying the words, I just want to kill myself? I mean, you're 7 years old. You want to kill yourself because we told you to pick up your toys? That's crazy. And as we continue to talk and really dive deep and start talking, it became very clear that this is verbiage she hears when she's watching the TV of today, when she's looking at social media, when she's talking to her friends. These are the catchphrases that they use. It's a weird dynamic when we talk about what's different between then and now, right? And I think, I'm a TV tube baby, whatever you want to call that, right? I think of shows like Growing Pains and Wonder Years and things like that for some reason had a lesson at the end of them, right? Always. There was always this sort of silent message throughout, and then all of a sudden at the end it sort of summed itself up. That's not the TV that our kids are exposed to today. And I'm not saying let television raise your children, but I am saying that they are inundated with Netflix and instant access to different social media pieces. And what they're watching isn't saying the same kind of messages that we grew up with. And I noticed that. There's been this big resurgence for Full House, right? Fuller House, and all of a sudden now my daughter wants to watch every episode. And that's what she told me the other day. She goes, wow, That was crazy. They talked in this one about how you shouldn't lie to your parents. And I said, because you shouldn't lie to your parents. And she's just like, I know now, I know. And I'm like, it's crazy to think that's, I know, I was like, thank God you were watching. It's crazy to think like that's how our kids are receiving a lot of that information. And I bring that up because when we start talking about mental health and those pieces, how our kids cope in society today, it's instant gratification through social media for them. They can Google the answer to anything, right? And it's not just the science teacher who pauses because they're not exactly sure what that calculation is supposed to come up to, and then the kid goes, oh, don't worry about it, it says it's blah, 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 blah. It's not just those moments. It's how do I respond when someone says this? And we have kids that are looking up those answers, and they're not communicating and turning to us as parents anymore. They're not communicating and talking to their peers anymore. I mean, my daughter is really struggling with that idea that there was ever a landline phone, and that's just how life was, right? And you know, we're having this conversation because she starts middle school next year. And so in this conversation, I'm like, you don't need a cell phone because you are responsible enough to call us and let us know should plans change. And her friends look at me like I'm abusing her in front of them. Like, oh my gosh, you want her to find a phone and to contact and communicate with you beforehand? Why wouldn't she just text you right before it happens? No, that's not how we communicate. But it is definitely a part of how our kids communicate in society today.
And so let me just enhance it a little bit, because part of our question that Chris and I are answering here is, you know, and so how is it different maybe than when we were in school, and what is the effect of social media, that type of thing. Let me just tell you an example from my world that happened yesterday that really, I think, hooks on to what Chris is talking about. Yesterday, right at the beginning of our first lunch period, a laser experiment in the tech lab went horribly wrong, and it largely involved a can of fog that needed to be sprayed. And so it tripped our alarm off, our fire alarm off, right at the start of lunch period, right? That's okay. We drill for this. We have contingencies. We're ready for this. So no big deal. We went on with, I put on my green vest that says incident command. I got my walkie-talkie. We got the kids all out, evacuated out on the field, lined up, accounted for. I was so pleased because we had never drilled it during a lunchtime before, right? What insane principal would intentionally throw the biggest curveball you could possibly throw? So I was very proud of our community, very proud of our kids. When the fire department came, they found out there was no threat. We let kids come back in, and immediately I'm confronted with we're down to 15 minutes for lunch instead of the 30 minutes that our kids typically get to eat. I said, okay, no big deal. I'm going to monitor the lunch. I said, go ahead and get started, guys. I'll monitor it. If it looks like we need to add some more time, I'll add on 10 minutes to lunch. We'll make sure you get lunch, right? I never thought about it again because it just seemed completely reasonable. Guys, I got to tell you, the number of kids that melted down and called home. That's the go-to. They got on their phones, and I saw them in tears. What's wrong, hon? Did the fire drill scare you? We don't get full 30 minutes for lunch anymore.
Right.
These are 14-year-olds. And I'm not making fun of them, but I'm trying to give you a glimpse into the fragility of our students now compared to what I think about before we had this nonstop access to our parents. And so there's this dynamic that we see playing out of, because I don't even have to deal with an upset as small as I might have 10 minutes less of lunch than I feel I'm entitled to, I don't know how to handle that. I melt down and I call home for advice. And unfortunately, home answers all the time.
Absolutely. And sort of as a secondary piece, because I know we sort of skipped over that drug use issue, I can give you an example. It happened with us yesterday. We're out there and we have a student who went to their car and they happened to open the door and a pipe fell out as a security guard went over there to say, hey, do you need anything? So all of a sudden it's like, oh,
perfect.
Yes, you do need something. You need to talk to us. So absolutely. So they're like, we're going to search the car. And so they're searching the car and they're pulling out a couple things here and there. And the kid loses it. And I mean, they are just upset as all sin, and they're like, wow, this is this, and they're dropping bombs, and I happen to stroll out there, and I'm like, calm down, you know, life is gonna be okay. And it was interesting to hear their response. They're like, oh, come on. How many of you guys used drugs back in the day? You watch television, you get online, you can see there's a ton of people who used drugs and who tried and experimented, and they were perfectly fine. And I think about, who's showing you that? Like, who's telling you that? They've got instant access to it. They have 100,000 role models online they've never met who don't have to tell the in-depthness of their story of what their lives have been, but what they hear is, yeah, I tried it. Yeah, I was good. They have role models out there that aren't us as either their teaching community, their parent community, or their immediate adult community that responds to them right away. What they have is what social media provides for them, and that is the sound bites. The sound bites of heroes that are like, from their perspective, heroes that have tried these things and have done these things and are okay on the other end of that. And I always think about when you talk about when we grew up, you maybe knew one person who had this rough life but was okay on the other end. And didn't you ever feel like every adult you ever talked to who ever tried anything had some traumatic story attached to it that they talked to you about, and you were like, oh my gosh, that's crazy. I don't want that to be me. Our kids don't live that way from what they're able to look at from their social media and those pieces. So I don't want to take up all the time, but I do think that those pieces have happened. And a last piece, popular culture exacerbating the issue, not just the social media part, but also some of the stuff that they buy. You know, we were talking about today, you know, you talk about those Mickey Mouse shirts, right? Now you got Mickey Mouse hands rolling a joint. Like that's crazy.
Very popular image.
Absolutely, very, very popular image. And all of us have like tried to or wanted to take your kid to Disneyland or Disney World if you haven't yet, and all those pieces, right? But this is the media that's being tagged out there. The Mickey Mouse picture where his hand's holding a diamond, and now that represents Juul and the stuff that they smoke. I mean, that's crazy, right? That's what's going on. And those are the pieces of culture that we've got to get back under control and get our handle on.
Yeah, and just as we'll pass it over to Colette and let her weigh in on that as well. I mean, I just want to confirm, in the last 3 days at my middle school, I think I've confiscated 8 vape pens, right? Vape pens are exploding in our schools. Yes, and the irony of it is the kids that are bringing the vape pens are largely my 4.2 students, my A students. It's my students with an entrepreneurial spirit. And it is quite amazing because they are the sweetest, nicest, friendliest kids in the world, and they know they're not doing something that they're supposed to be doing, but for them there's not this layer of taboo that used to be associated with it. It's just a little bit naughty for them, and they're willing to take that little bit naughty risk because the messaging from pop culture right now are, this is really not that much different than just eating too much candy, right? It's just, they come in flavors. We got bubblegum vape pens, we got, you know, creme brulee, we got all kinds of stuff. It's just candy.
Right, absolutely.
So, I'm sorry I had to step out there for a minute. My name's Colette Vaughn, and I work with the psychologists and social workers in the district. I'm supposed to add to this conversation. And as we've been going through it, I've just been making check marks because a lot of them are the same points that I wanted to make tonight. So I'm going to just try and summarize quickly. The foundation skills that kids are coming to school with are not the same as what they were. And that's a lot of the fragility that I think we're seeing. They really do not know how to handle those small bumps, like 10 minutes less at lunch, and they melt down. And so, as they were saying, the immediate response for me as well is call someone, text someone. And so we don't see the independence developing that we would like to see kids developing. Just that ability to problem solve on their feet, to know if they can just kind of stay the course for a little bit, things will smooth out. Frustration tolerance, just knowing it might feel bad for 5 minutes, but I'm going to make it through to the other side. So we try and build those skills in at school on top of all the other things that we're trying to teach as well. So that's part of what makes it difficult. If you start with that foundation not being solid, and then you actually start to build in mental health on top of that, that is when sometimes we go into that deep dive like Sid was talking about, where it's really hard to pull them back up or to reach our partners and say, okay, because we're still trying to build the foundation at the same time we're trying to help deal with some illness. So I want to make you aware of that. That frustration tolerance, we all had to deal with as kids. If we all, had time to say what was our worst moment and what did it feel like, we all had them. We just knew we'd make it through the other side. Kids, I don't think always know that, and I heard Molly refer to that. I heard these guys refer to that. Part of what is a helpful resource sometimes is if we're all on the same page of what are the signals we actually need to pay attention to. Not that I'm saying don't pay attention to kids. I didn't mean it to come out that way.
That's important.
But there are some signals that we know are just huge red flags that these are the ones we need to hop on. And there are other ones where it needs to be more like, honey, you're going to be okay. Or you're going to hurt for a little bit. That's what happens when you are sad or when you lose something. And so you're teaching that what is normal, and then you're attending when you know it's gone too far and it is no longer normal, and we need to get you some more help for this. So there are some programs, you guys teach them, we teach them some in the district. Youth Mental Health First Aid is a real nice way of looking at what's just typical in terms of development that we should expect and encourage kids to deal with, and what are those signals that we really need to jump on and make sure we're getting help when the kids need that help. The other piece that I was thinking, without repeating too much, I do want to let you know about something that I've heard about just within the past week from 2 different schools, and it's I've got to make sure I did this right, KMS and KYS, something they're texting. You guys are nodding, so it must be over on your end of the county too. Kill myself, kill yourself. And again, as you were saying, at school, we have to pay attention to that because we are not going to let a kid get hurt. However, they don't know that there's a distinction between saying it because you're reaching out for help and just saying it because all your friends are saying it. So it really complicates the picture. Again, what are the other signals they're giving? What else do we need to pay attention to? And then the last piece that I wanted to bring up is that I do think that we have a lot of loneliness in our county. And I think that's part of the frustration that we see, that not building those skills that we're expecting kids to have. And some of that, I think, as adults, we have to take responsibility for. We know that what reaches kids the most is having a caring adult who actually sees them for who they really are and who listens to them. And we're not doing very much listening. I think we're doing a lot of talking. And we're not teaching kids how to be quiet and centered within their own self. There's a huge push for mindfulness now. I think it's such a counterbalance to the crazy media world that we're living in. Sometimes as I'm watching TV with my phone and an iPad and sometimes my computer. And I'm like, what is that doing to my brain? And my brain's pretty well
Compromised.
done. Yeah. Well, yeah, I'm thinking if my brain was developing, and then I want a kid to come into school and have a focused attention for 10 minutes at a time. And yet, as an adult, I'm not even doing that with 4 things I like, because I'm bouncing, let alone just being able to sit quietly and have an honest conversation that has give and take to it. One of the mental health folks actually put out an email saying, what are you guys seeing right now? And she said, we have so many unexpected interactions because of technology. One of the things when I'm working with kids and they're telling me some terrible stuff that their friends are saying to them through some sort of social media, and you say, can you block that call? Oh, they think you have asked them to do the most difficult thing in the world. I mean, they will literally start to cry. I can't do that. I can't block them. It's like, they're hurting you. Please block them. Again, the foundation there is not to begin with, and then you have some of the very negativity that these guys were talking about coming towards them over and over again, and they don't even know how to put the shield up. And so it goes in deeper. So those were the things I kind of wanted to hit. If I started telling you how things are different from when I was a kid, we'd really be here a long time. So I'm going to put that one on pause. But it is a different world, but I think if we listen, those needs that our kids have are still the same.
Vaping was something we did with Vicks and something in the bedroom when you had croup, I think.
That must have been a long time ago.
It was a long time.
Some of us are wiser than others because we've been around longer.
Very true. Very
So Simone Gallick is one of our therapists who works for All Health Network, and she has the privilege of also being in 2 of your schools. So Simone, your questions. What are you seeing as a therapist in the schools regarding challenges that our youth are struggling with? What should parents be aware of, and how can parents help? You want to use
This one or this one?
Let's try it and see.
Yeah, can you guys hear me? Okay, good. Well, first of all, to add a little bit of my history, before kind of at the same time I came to All Health about like 2.5 years ago, I was partnering with a like local nonprofit called the Carson J. Spencer Foundation. And they really focus on suicide prevention and postvention. They do programs in schools and workplaces. And I actually got to come in 2014 and partner with Joe Chandler's ACE class. And that started a really cool product that is the Life Garden. That's still going strong? Awesome, yeah. And it really gives the kids a chance to understand those signs that you guys were talking about, while also they get to create their own social enterprise. So it's really cool. I'm glad to have that experience because I think that really opened my career to more suicide assessment prevention. I work with a lot of high acuity clients, and I like it. I'm weird like that. I really like it when they're at super high risk because that's when I think I can be most effective in helping them. That being said, my goal is to prevent that before it gets to that point. So we did mention, I'm really glad we're talking about suicide. I could talk about suicide risk and prevention all day, but to kind of keep it more brief, some of those risk factors might show up to different people at different times. So one of my things for parents is to really know the adults in your child's life, because they might be talking to a counselor and saying, stuff at school is not that great. I feel like I can't go on. And that might not seem as serious, but then they're talking to the coach, I'm really struggling with maybe I want to use alcohol or drugs. If they're talking to their friends and they recently went through a breakup, or they're just stuff at home is not great. All of those things are huge red flags that when you put them together really indicate a serious risk. And if we're not talking to each other about it, there's no way we would know. So I just had a situation like that happen today with one of my clients at Sierra. And, he's in middle school, but it's just all of these pieces started adding up. And I was like, yeah, we need to make a move on this and get you a higher level of care because, it's a very complicated piece of the puzzle, but again, it's once you kind of look at those things, you can get those supports in early, and I think that's really important as well. Gosh, I have so much to say about suicide prevention. I think an important thing too for parents to know is modeling the behaviors that you want your kid. A lot of that is paying attention to them, listening. And if you want, I can talk more about the specific things to look out for. But even just if they are throwing out casual comments I want to kill myself, or I feel like I just can't go on. Some of those more vague. Sometimes I feel like they're being intentionally vague statements. To ask them about it. I mean, it might be awkward for a minute, and they hate awkwardness. But it would rather I would rather you ask your kid and have it be an awkward 5-minute conversation than have them just keep it inside and keep experiencing distress. I think Colette talked a lot about some of this, what we call distress tolerance, that ability to handle stuff when it's getting really difficult. And I think that has, the threshold has gone down for a lot of kids. as well as like the academic pressure and expectation going up. So we have to kind of, again, really model that for our kids. If you are a parent, that might look like, hey, what are my attitudes about mental health? How am I projecting that? If we're kind of a family that's like, we pull ourselves up by our bootstraps and we don't really get help when we need to, your kid is going to read that as my problems aren't important, or even worse, like I'm weak because I can't fix this problem. And so that might like morph into other self-destructive behaviors. I do work with a lot of kids who self-harm as well. So just a note on that is that that always doesn't indicate that they're suicidal. They can go together, but a lot of times, like, I treat it like an addiction because they're getting something out of it. So it might be that they are getting some kind of emotional release in a physical way that they're unable to express otherwise. It might be, a lot of times we talk about it being for attention, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. If it is for attention, we need to, like, get them that attention in the form of, like, seeking mental health treatment. So again, just asking your kids about what's going on. But also it's that fine balance, I think, as a parent between asking them and also giving them space to make mistakes and like deal with natural consequences. I like the love and logic model a lot. I brought like books and stuff. And that is really just talking about like handing back responsibility to your children in a loving way. And this isn't in a like crisis situation, but like they might have to fail a class or like do summer school, or they might have to, you know, pay for something that they broke, and that's okay. That's going to help them in the long run. So if we're really quick to like jump in and save our kids, they're going to become the kind of adults that we then see at our agency because they can't problem solve effectively. So I'm looking at like if we get them in early, as soon as you have a feeling something's up with your kid, I suggest like seeking help. I use the analogy a lot with my clients, like, okay, if you have a really bad cold or flu, you try some like over-the-counter stuff, maybe some home remedies, and if that keeps going on for like weeks, you don't keep doing that. You go to the doctor, hopefully, right? And like you get a professional to like look at what's going on with you and kind of determine what the diagnosis is. And I think that works for us as well in mental health. Like, I like looking at the social supports and the coping skills clients already have, and then just like adding them. Because that makes it more personal. They tend to own it more. But again, if you're not seeking that help in the first place, it's really hard to improve a situation before it becomes a crisis. That being said, you know, we have an excellent crisis response team at All Health, so we definitely have resources for that out in the lobby. But yeah, I could, again, go on all day about like signs and things to look out for. But basically, if you have any kind of concern about your kid, check in and, you know, talk to them and let them know you're concerned, not that they're going to get punished if they're struggling, but that you want to help. And I think that's really the best approach to take. So thank you.
Thanks, Simone. So Dennis is one of our directors at All Health Network, and like he said, he's worked with Child and Family Services for a long time, and then he also works with folks who have substance abuse challenges. So Dennis, your question is, what mental health and substance use challenges are we seeing in our community? And other than emotional dysregulation, which is what we've been talking about when you just can't cope real well, what other signs and behaviors do we signal that we need to intervene? And what can parents do when they see those signs?
Thanks, Laurie. So yeah, I've been working with children and families for quite a while, and have seen kind of a change in the way that kids are presenting and families are presenting. Seeing a lot of, as you guys all talked about, mood disorders, that kind of inability to regulate. So a lot of anxiety and then consequently depression. And we also have a lot of trauma that we're seeing as well. And when we conceptualize trauma, we think of not just those bad experiences that happen to kids, whether they're abused or neglected, but also, you know, adverse childhood experiences. So what's it like if somebody's being bullied, or they're of low socioeconomic status, or racial minority, sexual minority? We look at those factors that are playing a role in kids' lives and that then have an impact on their mood. And they have to try and figure out ways to manage this, because like you guys talked about, we don't sit and talk with our kids quite nearly as much as we should. And so they're left up to their own devices to figure this out. And the way they're being told in the media to figure this out is through substance use. And so we have a kind of scaffolding effect taking place where they have the mental health issues, and then add on top of that the substance use. And those things really lead to what we're seeing in terms of emotional dysregulation. We see kids that aren't able to handle anything, and then often as parents, we're saying, oh, that kid's bipolar. Well, that's not bipolar, that's emotional dysregulation. But we're trying to label what is this behavior, because we can't figure it out. Well, what it really is in the way I view things, it's a brain problem. You know, we talk about mental health, we talk about substance use, but all of that is a brain problem. And I think we need to change the way we think about things and think about what's going on in the brain and what's happening. When they're dysregulated, that doesn't mean they're a jerk, even though it seems like they're a jerk. It means there's something happening in their brain that shouldn't be happening. And really what you're seeing is this amygdala part of your brain, which is this little walnut-sized part of your brain. And that connects to the hippocampus and then the medial prefrontal cortex, which is like right behind your eyes. And those three structures really are involved in emotion regulation. Well, when we have mental health issues, those areas of your brain are underdeveloped. You add substance use on those, and those continue to undermine the density of those areas of the brain. So literally, once you start those things off, they're not able to regulate because their brain doesn't allow them to do that. Now, it'd be great if we could go in there with a little scalpel or something and figure out how to enlarge that part of the brain, because then every American would buy into that concept rather than, oh, we can fix this through talking. But literally, that's what's happening. We are working on recreating those different structures in the brain, and that's what therapy is trying to do, is how do we do those things? How do we increase the density of the areas of the brain that really allow us to regulate? I call it kind of emotional callousing. How do we help children develop that ability to tolerate things? Now it's like, you know, I had to dig out in the yard and do all those things, and I had calluses, and the first time you do it, you know, your hands bleed and don't callus. Well, when the fire alarm goes off, they're bleeding rather than, oh, I'm already calloused by that. And so that's what we need to teach them to do in the brain. Unfortunately, we have this drug epidemic problem that's happening throughout the state and the nation. Highlands Ranch, because I also work with forensics, has one of the highest arrest rates for opiates in all of Douglas County. And so you're seeing, and then marijuana in the state of Colorado, and now going national, is a completely acceptable drug. In fact, it's probably more acceptable than smoking tobacco right now. And I tell people, you know, if you add up the number of Starbucks and the number of McDonald's in Colorado, you add those two things together, and that's half the number of the dispensaries in Colorado right now. So we have legalized this and said it's okay to our youth. But what it's doing is literally shrinking those parts of the brain, again, that have to do with emotion regulation. I try and tell people, you know, we put such an emphasis on infancy and making sure that people are developing during infancy, and we do everything for our infant to get their brain stimulated, and we buy them toys and music, da-da-da. Well, there's 2 times in your life where really your brain develops: infancy and then again in adolescence. So we know that when mothers are using during infancy, that negatively impacts development of the brain, which leads to higher incidences of ADHD, depression, and school problems, really educational problems, learning disorders, those sorts of things. So literally we're saying, you know, do everything you can to prevent that when they're an infant, yet when we come to adolescence, it's game on, right? So we really need to change that, and I push for that all the time, is that you cannot let somebody use substances during the time that your brain's forming, to an extent that you only see in infancy. So I think we need to continue to push on drug use being decreased and not tolerated in any sort of form when it comes to adolescence. I say a lot of the time, I don't care if you're 40, your brain's kind of cooked. There's not a lot of damage you're going to do at that point. But when you're 16, all right, we've got a problem, right? The other thing is we have to learn to conceptualize that addiction is an adolescent onset disease. So before the age of 21, 98% of people that are going to have addiction problems throughout their life are already addicted. So if you wait till you're 25, you're too late, right? Everyone that we work with that's an adult, and you think about the homelessness and living on the street and they're shooting up, no. That started when they're 13, 14, and we really need to be aware of that. So I tell parents, be aware of the signs for mental health and addiction. Change in peers, change in friends, change in their activities. They used to like to do these things, now they no longer like to do them. Things in your home come up missing. We don't know quite why. Kids come home, they go straight to their room, they don't say hi, they just boom, right to their room. What's going on with that? You can look more directly at like pupils. Their pupils are either dilated or pinpoint. You can look at glassy eyes. All of those sorts of things, and you can start to look at, okay, those are concerning signs about possible drug use. Mental health, they start to isolate more, they do change their friends, their appearance changes. You start to want to pay attention to what is changing that's not going into the norm anymore. In terms of, what you can do for these things, one I say is don't talk to your kids, like knock that off. Listen to your kids. Ask a lot of questions. First thing parents think about is, well, I need to talk to my kids. No, you don't. You need to listen. You will do far more just listening to them and helping them come to a conclusion on their own than sitting lecturing. I tell parents they get about 5 words if they're going to lecture, because after that it's like wah wah, wah, Snoopy, Charlie Brown. Yeah, you become that teacher. So if you listen, almost to the point of being annoying and asking questions, that's what's going to work best. It also works best to do it in the car, especially with adolescent males. Looking at them doesn't work well. Staring straight ahead as you're driving is probably some of the most profound and important conversations you're going to have with your teen. The other thing I'll say is in terms of, that we look at the kids, and I know we've been talking about they don't have the emotional capacity to regulate. I will point the finger back at the parents and say, like, when they make that phone call, you answer it because you can't tolerate that your kid's in distress. Mm-hmm. You need to learn how to tolerate your own emotions and the fact that your kid's in distress, and that's okay. They'll be okay. But you guys need to start first and not put that on our kids to be able to do something that their brain, like I talked about earlier, isn't set up to do. But as you do that and they start to learn to become more self-reliant, they're rewiring their brain. They're creating calluses. So in the future, they're better able to handle those situations. The other thing is, treatment works. There's a reason why I kind of went into this field, and I think a lot of us, we know it does work. If you are concerned, get treatment. Don't punish your kids for drugs. That doesn't make sense. I'm all for a zero tolerance policy, but there's not a need to punish. There's a need to understand and to work with them and figure out what's going on. There's something, I'm sorry. And to figure out what's happening for them rather than just punishing them and telling them to, knock it off. I don't know. Okay, that's bad. So, in terms of that, do take them in to get the help that they need, help that understanding. I was trained as a child and family therapist, so I'm probably biased, but I do really believe that the important piece, and you guys all talked about it tonight, is family therapy, connecting in that. You know, I think we see a lot of parents that will kind of bring in their kid and go, I don't know what to do with them, you do it. And I'm like, that's not gonna help you when you go home at night if we're doing that. So we want to do family counseling where we can work with you guys, help you guys connect, help you guys understand how your family works and what's gonna work for you. And then the other thing is group counseling. Group counseling is fantastic for children and adolescents. Not only are they learning the skills that they need in terms of social emotional learning, but they're also forming connections, relationships, having peer interactions that aren't based around social media and television and those sorts of things. So, you know, a lot of times we think of the concept or the model is we're gonna go in, we're gonna do individual therapy, you'll sit on the couch, we'll do an hour, we're all good. We'll change that mind frame to our families going in. Everybody in this household's gonna go. And groups are fantastic. You know, getting your kids involved in those groups, and we have them run all the time. That is a hugely helpful modality in which to work with children and adolescents.
Thank you. I think you started the squeakies. So we have Dr. John Rudersdorf here, which we are all privileged to have him. Thank you for coming. So your question is, when should parents seek treatment for their children or their youth? When do we use medication in combination with therapy? And what can we expect from that medication?
Oh, thanks so much. These guys actually stole so much of my thunder that I don't know how much I'm going to say about certain things. But if you guys know me, I'm kind of a talker, so I'll try and not do that too much tonight on certain things. But one of the things that stood out to me just in the conversation that we're having is the idea, you know, just hearing people say mental health, mental illness, you know, and I think it comes back to one of the barriers that I see when people come in to see me is how uncomfortable does that make you feel? Mental health, mental illness, you know? Oh my gosh, is that what's going on with my kid? I don't know. What's happening? I don't know. And it leads to this stagnation. It leads to this, I'm not sure what to do, and too oftentimes it leads to nothing, right? Take a word the way mental health, illness. I mean, literally, that's such a different, for so many people that I work with, it's such a different feeling. And that's literally the way, when I work with people, that's how I think about it. It's funny, I always love hearing, talking about parts of the brain and all that stuff, because that's part of the, you know, the medical training. But it is so important to think about it in terms of not just I'm trying to decrease this negative thing that's happening in my kid's life, but also on the flip side of that coin, thinking about your own health. I'm trying to build on the positive. I'm trying to do these healthy pro-social behaviors that are age appropriate, that aren't throwing my kid out there to so much dysregulation and different influences where I don't know what they're able to take in and what they're not. The idea, it was, when I heard Molly and Evan talking down there, I thought that was awesome, guys. You did a really good job. You used a really important word where it feels like, and I thought, how different does that feel from where I come from sometimes? And that word was push when you're talking about parents and pushing and feeling pushed towards these things. And the word that I often try and work with people to think about in their brains when they're thinking about how am I incentivizing or working with my kid, the word is teach. What am I teaching them by this moment? And if it's just pushing, if I'm just telling them work harder, work harder, work harder, what am I teaching by that? And is that what they need to hear? Are they able to tolerate that? Are they able to do those things? And how can I balance what my needs are as a person and as a parent with where they are at? You know, I'm supposed to talk about like signs of like when should I refer my kid. I think these guys did a really good job about going through all of that stuff and talking about change. I often, when I work with parents, I always say, you're the expert on your kid when you come in, not me. You know, it's, you know your kid, you know where the baseline is. And that extends to friends a lot too, right? I mean, it's, you know what this person is like. Better or for worse, you have that baseline knowledge. That's so important. So when you see a change in that, just having that communication is really important, but it gets so uncomfortable at times to talk about that because it's not something that's innate in people. I always, you know, and I think that that's what a lot of people, when they come in to see me, I see this look on their faces so often. It's like, I'm just meeting you, and I'm going to talk about this really personal stuff that you know, I may not have, I don't talk about this with my folks, I don't talk about this with my friends, and it's so interesting for me to see that relationship as I talk with people change as a course of just sharing that information. I think in order to talk about like, well, just to piggyback on what they said about, I mean, just to throw some stats at you in terms of how often do kids come in for mental health services, right? If, you know, think of a percent in your mind of what percent of kids with mental health needs come in to see people. If you look at the big old population studies, it's going to say 20 to 30%, right? 70 to 80% of these kids are not coming in to seek treatment for mental health services even though they need it. I mean, that's huge. Just think about that. And even in those kids who do come in, right, how many actually go in to see a specialist and what they do? It's going to be about, it's 15 to 25% for the most part. I mean, it's really a small number. So the idea of what are those barriers is something to think about, not only with stigma or with what you think about it, but also that family culture. So many of the things that we talked about today, whether it's drug use and how we think about that in my family, how, what do I do when I feel distressed and do I go run into my parent? Or how does my family think about all of the different stressors that are in my life? I mean, so much of that comes down to family culture and talking about, you know, hey, how you're feeling, and that's okay to be stressed, especially if I'm working so hard and I'm getting 4 hours of sleep when the American Academy of Pediatrics says 9 to 10 hours at that age, right? So, all right, so, you know, when I think about, like, what does a child and adolescent psychiatrist do? I think that I was talking with Laurie about this when I came in. It's so interesting because it's like, man, I think people come in expecting that I'm like gonna have like a nice couch and stuff like that, and I ain't gonna look at you, and I'm just gonna let you talk about stuff. And it's so funny because really what it is an active conversation. It's talking about what's going on in a person's life. It's talking about what they've been through. And then the parts that come in with the medical side is, what's your medical history? How could that be contributing to the things? What's your social history? How is that going in? What's your family history? What happens in your family, and how does that interact with what's happening in your life? And when we talk about medications, I feel like you have to talk about that, because when you think about, when doctors like me think about using medications in kids, which is often a really hard topic for a lot of parents to think about, right, for mental health needs, it's important to know, I think, how that assessment gets made, how we think about it, what all goes into that. And that's you know what I sit there and do every day, is thinking about the different parts that'll go into it. And when it comes back down to what we think about when you're designing a plan to kind of help someone deal with these things, it's always that biopsychosocial treatment plan, right? We get audited and all that stuff. How's that plan doing? So the therapist can tell you all about it. But what it comes down to is that biological part. What is that organic part? That part of that Dennis talked about so eloquently, which is what is my brain like? What is my body like? How does that react and lead to these things that are happening in my life? The psychological part. What are those thoughts I'm having? Even though I can't control them sometimes, how does that affect my behavior and my emotions and then my relationships? And how does that all go in to what I'm experiencing? And then that social piece. How is those things in my life, whether it's friends having problems or issues with abuse, trauma, those things, that all really if you think about how to help with those things, it's drastically different ways, right? And when we think about medications, it comes after that. So you think about, okay, what can medications help with? It's not going to change your life. It's not going to make decisions for you. It doesn't intervene in those social realms that can lead to significant symptoms. When we think about medications, I mean, it's hard to sit here and talk about that part of it in 30 seconds because it can be so different, right? The medications that we use to treat ADHD are way different than the medications that we use to treat things like anxiety and depression in young people. The medication part of it comes after that interview, right? You rule out those medical conditions, you talk about all the different factors going in your life, you formulate it as a part of a team, is the model that All Health uses, and is, in my opinion, a great model. You talk about with the therapist, what are these therapy points that we are going to work on, and then you start socially and building the things that are going to help this family. In young people, it's so much family work, right? We've all kind of talked about it. I'm not going to talk too much more about it now, but it's so important. After you do that, you rule out those medical things, you think, okay, what can medications help with? So some things they can and some things they can't, right? when I have people come in, use depression as an example. Someone comes in and says, Dr. Rudy, I just feel down. Can't explain it, don't know why, but I'm getting out, my grades are all right, I'm going out with my family. I just don't feel good, and what can I do about that? And I think about medications. Are medications going to help? No, for the most part, right? They're not. You can talk about studies and clinical evidence, but there's not a lot of indication for what we would designate as mild and moderate depression. The medications are going to be indicated. When you think about significant, severe symptoms, things that they don't change my life a little bit, they can devastate my life. I don't want to get out of bed in the morning time. I'm not even going to school. Don't care about my classes. I'm not taking care of myself. I'm not sleeping. I'm not eating. And I don't even think, and I don't know if I want to be alive anymore, or I'm having thoughts of ending my life. Those are the times when those things get so significant, so severe, that medications can play a role. And it varies between diagnosis and the things you're working with in people, but those are the times when they have been shown to be useful, not only in helping people to recover faster, but to help prevent relapse. And with the people who get better faster tend to be the people who do better long term. So it's so important not only to consider all of these different treatment modalities, but to establish that care and not wait. And if we want to look at literature again, if you look at depression and anxiety, people wait years. The average for mood disorders from symptom onset to treatment in adolescence is 6 to 8 years. Anxiety, 9 to 23 years. People will push and push and push and keep going, and you don't have to swim upstream all the time. There's things we can do to help, whether that's with medications or not. When I think about additional things, medications, people ask, man, I don't want my kid on the happy pill. There is no such thing as a happy pill. I will guarantee you that. It does not work that way. The analogy that I make sometimes when indicated is turning down the volume, right? But that's when it becomes so important to focus on those other things that I talked about, which is that psychological part, my thoughts and behaviors and how that goes into it, that social part. What are these things in my life that perpetuate what's happening, and how can I change that? Medications are not going to do that. There is, in almost every domain across diagnosis, if you look at the literature in children and adolescents, it's the combination, for severe symptoms, the combination of medication and therapy. And a lot of times that therapist is not only doing therapy, but they're doing social work and case management services in addition to trying to help people out. You guys did such a good job with everything else. I don't know how much else I'm going to go into all of that. Oh, well, I guess one last point I wanted to make is that a big question that families ask me is, I don't want my kid on this pill forever. I say, that's great, neither do I. And that's not usually the way it works, right? You have something, you have this symptom onset, you have this thing you're treating, you go through a treatment course, and the vast majority of people are able to go off of medications, and that's why it makes it so much more important to work on those other domains that we talked about when we develop a treatment plan. So, all right, thanks very much, guys. And I look forward to answering any questions you have.
Thank you. So Kathy's going to take the microphone, and you get to ask the questions now. And you guys can share, and we'll give you this one.
Does anyone have any questions? No one has questions? Okay. Barb Cousins has a question.
Hi, thank you so much for this evening. We really appreciate this. My question is more of a general nature. I do a lot of volunteer work with the gifted and talented in the Douglas County School District community. And I think especially as the two panelists on my left have exhibited tonight and stated that they're not getting a lot of sleep. They're obviously working very hard. There's that Excel aspect, there's AP classes, et cetera. And there is that push in this district, which we really appreciate, to do well academically. But where is that balance? And especially for these GT kids, because there is somewhat of a separate category. They think differently. Their brains are actually wired a little differently. They're a separate group. And then there's also, of course, the high achievers. So where is the balance with all of this? And then where do things kind of fall off possibly the edge?
Sounds like you guys, I think.
Oh, it does?
Yeah.
Yeah, the balance question I think is spot on.
I don't know that I can speak a lot more to that. What I can tell you from my experience is I concur 100% with you. Some of the kids that I believe are the most fragile and the most needy are the ones identified as gifted and talented in my school. And that's a little bit counterintuitive. We tend to think of, oh, those kids have it made, man. Everything comes so easy for them. They're just smart. They're blazing through school, right? That's, absolutely not true. We also, and this is an indictment to ourselves as a system. I don't think as a system we've done a very good job of differentiating truly what is gifted and talented and what is the result of trophy kids. And trophy kids is an epidemic in our community. My parenting will be judged at the end of the day by the success of my kid. And so these kids experience an inordinate amount of pressure to be perfect in everything, to be the lead in the play, to be the star on the soccer team, to be in all AP classes, to be in honors classes. And our kids feel a sense of thriving on that because they don't know any better, because they love their parents, because it feels good to, for all those reasons, but it becomes in itself a pathway to an immense amount of overpressure and over stress that is inflicted upon them that is not necessarily in their locus of control. So I think it's something that is very, very serious. And to your point and to Dr. Rudy's point as well, I think until we have the courage as a community to seriously address the sleep issue, we're not going to get very far in this conversation. And I'll just say that is, we know for a fact sleep deprivation mirrors itself in the brain as ADHD almost identically. We know that many of the symptoms of bipolar are really about sleep deprivation. And instead of confronting it with the medicine kids need, Molly, which is sleep, we medicate them with other things.
Absolutely, and I would also point out, let's not forget that I think that balance is missing for all of our students. I agree, with the GT and the AP level kids, but one of the things I noticed at the high school level is even the students who aren't in GT or aren't AP or aren't on that track, they're finding other ways to not turn off for the night. They don't know how to turn things off. Yeah, their phones, watching TV, talking to a friend, using their iPads and those pieces. They don't know how to disconnect, to reconnect back to themselves even. And so I think finding the balance for all of our kids is a big piece. And part of it is also because we as adults have started to do a worse job of turning ourselves off, right? And just finding that time to rebalance. I used to think it was the craziest thing on the planet when I was growing up. My parents every day, and I'm talking every day, came home and they took a nap from 4:30 until 6:30. It used to drive me insane as a kid because I wanted help on homework, I wanted this, I wanted that. I didn't understand how they could find the ability to sleep. Like, I'm like, how are you sleeping? Gosh, there's so much to do. I wish to God I had their schedule right now because I would love to be able to come home every day and go to sleep for 2 hours. And the kids are up here like, yeah, absolutely, right? I think going back once again to an earlier question, that we had generations before us that found times and ways to be able to disconnect and just shut down for a little while to regroup and re-energize. And I don't think any of us in society today have done a really good job of that, from adults through kids.
I think with the GT population in general, they tend to be wired differently, a little bit more sensitive to begin with, more intense in terms of how they experience and feel things. So that balance piece becomes even more individualized for each particular kid and how they work, how they run, which requires us, I think, as adults, whether it's parents or teachers or what, to be more attuned to that, and then to give them some of the skills to do those things. Because I don't think that develops as readily for them as some of their intellect does. And so to be able to say to them, it's okay to do these things, or you need to do these things today, to promote that balance, to teach them even how to tell when they're in balance or out of balance, what their list of menu items are, if they're feeling that they're out of balance. I think some of that needs to be direct instruction for those kids.
I would definitely agree with the direct instruction. It's okay to tell your kids they don't have to do all the things. Like, you can limit their activities, not in a way that seems like you're a dictator, but just like, no, you get to do like maybe 1 or 2 extracurriculars, and the rest of your time you get to like relax. If you're not doing homework, I know you guys are probably like, when are we relaxing? But like, making that time is super important. And if you don't get into that habit, I think early, you'll become an overworked adult, and then we'll see you on the adult side. But also, I think a large part of that is just that culture of self-care in general. We toss around the idea of self-care a lot, but I don't think we always like stop and think about what it means. And, you know, a lot of times it's like treat yourself, that kind of thing. But it can also be like setting limits on your activities. And it can be, you know, making time when it seems like we don't have time. And it might seem like you're sacrificing one activity over the other, but kind of looking at, in the end, you know, is my kid still having fun doing this? Is this something that he or she enjoys, or is this like an expectation they feel like they need to have? Is this like only something they're doing to go on a college, you know, application? Or is this something that's really like enriching their lives? I use a modality of treatment, I didn't really get as into it, called DBT. It's dialectical behavior therapy. And part of that emotional regulation piece we talked about earlier is like finding pleasurable activities. So that can be like, what's a real pleasurable activity as opposed to something that feels like an expectation, and offering more of those choices as opposed to the more, the activities that suck time but aren't as rewarding, if that makes sense.
I'll just add, I went to CU, so this is where I got this. And in a business class, I had a professor, and I'll never forget, he told us D's equal dollars. And I liked it because he went on to explain, and this doesn't count for you, Molly, and you guys napped during this. He went on to explain that, you know, people that often don't do as well in school end up making more money in the long run because they excelled in social skills. Well, other kids were busy studying, they were busy figuring out people and how to work with people and how to do those things. So when I think about our kids these days, I think about all our kids are equal, they just have different skill sets. And we have to learn how to embrace those skill sets rather than pushing them in to be perfect at everything. How do we build upon those things that are naturally inherent in them that are going to help them be successful?
I love it. You put a bunch of administrators and therapists and doctors in a room and everyone wants to talk. No, I think these guys did a great job. The only points that I might add, and these guys will talk about things like zone of proximal development, right? What that means, it all relates to personal growth. And if it comes back to, I don't care whether you're working on, you know, academics or job or whatever, or sports, if you are living in your bubble and nothing changes, then you're not growing, right? If that rubber band is stretched too far, it's going to snap back and you're not learning. You're outside, you're being overwhelmed. Your brain is not taking in the things in the way it could. There's that zone that's outside of that bubble, but it's not being overwhelmed of where learning happens, right? It's social learning, academic learning, whatever it is. And that's going to vary by kid, and it's so hard to take a systematized and institutionalized method of teaching and then trying to tailor that to that individual kid. And I think that's where the rubber hits the road and it becomes hard sometimes. I think it comes back also to that idea of a trophy kid. You know, that's such a term that I don't use, but I definitely see it sometimes. And it comes back to how do I emphasize to my kids where their value is? You know, in those kids who may not be the best, who may not be the most successful academically, but man, they're awesome people and they love to do these things. And look at the way they can light up a room when they go into it. Those skills are those values. You place the value in that the innate characteristics of that person and the things they have rather than what they achieve. I think that, obviously kids, no matter where you are, and adults are the same way. There's a bell curve, right, for how successful you're gonna be at something, how well you can tolerate something. And you don't have to be that 1% at the end of the bell curve. That's okay, to be somewhere else. And I think everyone learns as you get older in life that there are things you're good at and that things are not.
I would like to is this on?
Yep.
Okay. I would like to comment on the trophy kid thing.
Yeah.
So I was pushed as a kid a lot towards the all AP, all honors. I was in GT when I was younger. In middle school, I was in the advanced classes, and I've taken like 12 AP classes in high school starting freshman year. I think when you get to a teenager, it's more than being a trophy kid. It becomes an addiction. You don't, the need to do well, and it's instant gratification through your parents and through your teachers is something that you'll lose sleep over and you can't do without. It becomes at that point less something that your parents pushed and something that you took on. I didn't take the AP classes as my junior and senior year for them. I took them for me because I felt the need that I've already set my expectations so high, and I did take one regular class last year, and I was miserable because I didn't feel accomplished. I felt like I was just sitting there, and I felt like I was it's gonna sound terrible, but with kids that were below me. And I never felt accomplished in the things that I would do in that class. It's essentially like crack. Like, you don't ever get away from it, and that's how it'll be in college. But if you do want to have a trophy kid, they get full ride scholarship, so go with that.
Yeah, kind of going off what you said, like freshman year, I remember my parents encouraged me to sign up. It was my first AP class. We could only take one AP class freshman year, AP Human Geography. So freshman year, we finished that. I finished with an above 4.0 GPA, so I felt really good. But as soon as the end of that year, I realized, okay, this is the expectation now. I can't go below this, and I can only keep growing higher. And after this year, I've been realizing more and more, okay, now this is a competition between everybody else in my grade. I want to go to a good college. I have an enormous fear of failure now, or fear that I will be inferior. So, I've been pushed through Boy Scouts my whole life. I've tried to get involved. Yeah, I've tried to get involved pretty much in everything from school activities to also extracurricular activities. My parents have put me in many different things, so I've grown in these activities, but like Molly said, it kind of becomes an addiction to just, okay, what else can I do to add to my resume? What else can I do to be better than the next guy? So, I've gotten my Eagle Scout. I'm in my 4th year of Chinese. I play in the church band. I try and get involved in every single thing in my community. I'm in DECA. I play lacrosse. I try and be a fully rounded student so I can look good on a college resume. But eventually it just gets to a point where it's just like, what am I doing? Like, am I happy? I want to be the trophy kid. I want to be gifted and known as talented. But, at what cost, really?
And just to add, I think you explained it and gave such a beautiful picture of it. College deans use a word very, very frequently now among their own conversations, and they call kids like that crispies. Crispies. And what they mean is the kids that are showing up to college burned out. They are crispy toasted. They've been competing, they've been proving, they've been feeding an addiction of extrinsic self-worth and being driven. And when they get to college, which kind of was the whole goal in the first place, they're done. They're done. And the mental health issues in colleges are huge right now. So it's definitely something that continues on.
Are there other questions? I have one that I would like to ask. And I guess I'll talk a little bit about my son. I have a 16-year-old. I also have a 3-year-old. Mental health is a big deal to me, specifically. My question is, there was an incident at one of the schools, a tragic incident, and my son brought up to me that he was confused as to why the kids didn't know how to emotionally process. He didn't say emotionally process, but how to deal. From selfies of tears posted on social media, he was confused by this. It bothered him. We talked about it for weeks. I've heard other people talk about, well, when you can text an emoji and that resolves your emotional processing. I'm trying to figure out where kids are with regard to that emotional processing, and maybe Molly can throw something out there, or Evan. But that was really disturbing to me because you want them to be able to feel something. You want them to be able to express what they're feeling as a parent so that you can kind of jump in and work them through it. So where do you see kids now with regard to that emotional processing?
I'm going to hand it over to Molly because I know she's got something to say to that. As I do that, I want you to hear the undercurrent of your question, which is that even in our grief, even in a very authentic encounter with an emotion, one of the first places our kids go to is, how should I perform here? There's not an authenticity. There's a, let's see, how do I categorize this? How do I curate my grief? How do I capture it? What should I do with this? Am I doing it in the right way? And again, it's already a very extrinsic, very outward focus. Your view of the selfie is exactly right. I mean, the authentic journey is the journey inward. And ironically, all of the photographs we take are inward as well. And it isn't until we start getting outside of ourselves that we actually begin that journey. But Molly, I'd love to hear your thought on that.
So in my personal experience with high school kids, in the matter of emotional processing, we don't. It'll manifest in other ways. A lot of times with your honors and GT, it'll be work harder on what you're doing. You'll perform better and that'll relieve some of the stress. But a lot of times it'll end up, you'll push it down and then it'll all come out at once in some kind of just essentially tantrum. But in addition to that, a lot of it is we're so desensitized to all of it. When tragedy does strike, we need to figure out what face to put on for others so they see that we're upset. When granted, chances are you may not be that upset. As a matter of politics, and I'm not going to drag that into this, but we see so much violence and so much tragedy on an everyday basis. We're a generation that hasn't lived in a world without terrorism. We don't know what it looks like to see true tragedy, and that has a lot to do with it. We don't know how to react because we were never taught to react. Our parents, they taught us what we should do, but we never have had the opportunity to understand what we're feeling because we never built relationships with other people. We have always had social media. A frowny face emoji is just the equivalent of, it's not necessarily what we're feeling, but that's what we equate to being the social norm of how we're supposed to process things.
Were you done? So I have been heading up the crisis team for the district, and so I've seen a lot of different age levels dealing with crisis as they occur. And what I see is that kids, especially when they're first faced with it, if they've never dealt with a death before or been confronted with that, they honestly don't know because that's not a part of their lives anymore. I don't know how many of us take our kids to funerals or talk to them or sit with them when we're feeling sad. I think when we are dealing with things, we tend to self-isolate, and so the modeling piece that is genuine and real isn't there. And so as our crisis responders go out, we find ourselves spending a lot of time just sitting with the kids and letting them feel what they need to feel, and many times helping them normalize that. Because some of them will feel badly, and they'll say to you, the older kids, not the little ones, but the older kids will say, I'm not really feeling very bad. Something's wrong with me. And it's like, no, it maybe just is not that close to you, or
it hasn't hit you yet, and that's okay. That's normal. We all grieve in our own way. And so there's a lot of teaching that happens around how do you let those feelings come up? What do you do when you're there? And how do you just feel them as opposed to try and fix them? I've had a lot of phone calls through the years. I've been in the district 34 years now, I think. And I've had a lot of phone calls from parents through the years saying, well, you see I'm trained as a school psychologist. Well, you see my child, they're very upset because we're going through a divorce, which many times is another kind of grief that we go through. And to have to say to them, I can see them and I can help make sure that there's a bridge here and a friendly face and someone that they know to seek out and all that kind of things. They're going to have to feel sad for a while. And I can hear sometimes, and it's usually the moms that call, kind of like, you're going to let my child be sad? And it's like, I not only am going to, but your child needs to be sad. They've had a loss. They have to recover from that physically. And I think we've lost some of that in our culture. And so we're trying to, again, build it in a world that doesn't reinforce that. And then, as Molly said, it just kind of stuffs down and it comes out in an unexpected way. And sometimes that triggers some of the drug and alcohol concerns that Dennis was talking about. So I don't know if that helps or not.
Thank you for that. That was helpful for me, so I appreciate that. Anybody else have a question in the audience at all? Oh, yes.
So, Sid. Yeah. I'm sorry, Chris. We've been talking a lot about kids and how they tend to have trouble with coping and avoidant behavior and the statistics of kids not coming to school. Yet the numbers just came out recently of how many kids are graduating. And so you guys are really getting the kids to the finish line. How would you say that's happening?
Depends on how we define the finish line.
Well, you're graduating them.
We're graduating them, but that's one metric. It's a very, very important metric, and it's a metric that we care a lot about. But again, it gets into how many of those kids are successfully going on right now. The millennial generation that we all love to tease and joke about. What are we seeing in that crowd right now, and how many of them are successfully going on to college and pursuing their passion and actually engaging in the workforce? How many are going, no question. There's plenty of successes to talk about as well. In the schools, obviously we have, the mandate is K-12, right? To get your kids to that finish line, knowing that finish line is really just the starting line of the rest of life. And I think that's really a big part of this conversation is sometimes the artificial world of the race that was called school, K through 12, masks the fact that we maybe haven't wholly and fully adequately prepared our kids in terms of the emotional regulation, in terms of the emotional calluses. Dennis talked about that. We haven't really prepared them for the real race that they're about ready to run. And I think that's what's terrifying. I think that's really what's scary is it looks good because they got a diploma. Are they really ready to launch into life?
And even if, as we start looking at the adjustments that have happened in education, I mean, we adjust instruction like crazy to meet the kid where they are from purely an instructional level, but not necessarily from a health level and what some of those other sustainable pieces are that they're going to need going out the door. I honestly think for most educators, that's what scares us more than anything else, right? Seeing a kid walk across the stage and saying, yeah, they passed class, but gosh, they're going to have a rough life in the next 3 years. I mean, and those comments do get said, which is hard because our society isn't built in a way to say, well, then how do we bring that kid back and wait? Maybe they're just not ready to truly go out into the world with the baggage and everything else that they've got going on in their own personal life. They haven't learned the coping skills to feel as successful as they could when they walk across that stage. But I would absolutely agree, yeah, our graduation rates for the country have gone up. I mean, they have just gone up. But I think because that was one of our identifiers in the early 90s that we were missing. We were missing the mark because we were stopping people from moving on because absenteeism. You're not here, there's no way that you have enough knowledge to go across stage. And we've changed that narrative to say, no, let's adjust and let's teach to what we think they would know based on how long they have been here. But there are other facets in that, which are those emotional stability pieces that we have missed.
Well, and if I could add to that really quick, I think at All Health we talk a lot about resiliency, and kind of coupled with even just some things Molly said before about like, okay, if this is starting to become like that validation seeking is an addiction, how can we couple that with resiliency? And I can tell you also, to piggyback on that last question, all of the teens I work with are really good at those coping skills of avoidance. Like I can watch TV, or I can like go online when I feel distressed, but not like being able to like be with that emotion. I think like Colette really emphasized, does them a huge disservice. And so looking at different ways you can build resiliency into just their lives in general, and that can look very individualized. But that's something I think we need to work on focusing on, that and developing like emotional intelligence as well, because that will definitely serve them more in the real world than, whether or not they have this piece of paper that they worked really, really hard for. So that's kind of my take on that.
My personal opinion, it's really easy to graduate. Like, the standards are pretty low. I could have graduated last year just based off my credits. You need 4 years of English and like 20 hours of community service, I think. That's about it. And some math and science. But like, there's no test on emotional intellect and maturity. It's, for like example, high school senior. And I was in my AP environmental class like 2 weeks ago, and I'm sitting there and we're doing a mapping activity. We're working on our world-class outcomes. And we're sitting there, and this girl goes, "Which way's north?" And I'm like, "What?" And she's like, "Which way's north on the map? Like, I know it's up in like real life, but like on the map, which way is north?" And I yelled at her, but like that is something that just, it shows that I don't really see too much of a correlation between graduation rates and intellectual maturity, because you don't have to be smart to graduate. You have to show up. Yeah, it's seat time, and whether, as long as you turn in the right stuff, you can pretty much graduate. It's not hard to, it's more of the law type thing. I think there should be a standard for emotional maturity and intellectual maturity before we do graduate and before we're let off in the world. Because if I watch kids cry over a 73% on a calc test, I don't know what to do with you. Like, go into the AP exam, and just AP calculus exam at the end of the year, like the second week of May, and you'll have kids sitting there bawling during this exam. And it's a 4-hour exam, it's not easy. But kids are just in shambles because they don't know how to handle something like that.
If our teachers are our goal is for them all to be highly effective, I think our goal for our students is that they're highly affective, right? They become very deeply feeling individuals who are very aware of their emotions as they're experiencing them. That'd be a great standard.
Thank you, Sid. So I want to wrap this up so we can get Molly and Evan home and put them to bed, right?
They're like, no.
Right. Oh, there you go. We do, so we need to go home too. So I want to thank our panelists very much. You gave up your night with your families. I appreciate it very much. Thank you. And I want to thank you all, because you gave up your night. You showed that you're interested in either kids that you work with or kids that you go home to. So thank you very much. We are going to stick around a little bit if you want to have some one-to-one questions, and then Evan and Molly are going home to bed. So thank you very much for your time tonight. Oh, go.
No, I just want to add one thing, and it's sort of a little bit off topic, and thanks, and I'm sorry I didn't jump in sooner, but we had a really great conversation today. I've worked with in my career, I've worked with a lot of different populations, and one thing I've learned is that the world can be very different for very different people. And we've talked about the barriers that go into talking about mental health needs and services and whatnot, and how parenting advice should go or child development should go. But if there's something, if for people who are listening that doesn't resonate with your life, right? That I dealt with things that aren't the things that really, this doesn't seem like it would have helped, like it would have made sense. Don't let that be something that would ever stop you from having that conversation. People come from so many different places and have so many different stressors that lead to this time in their lives that's this emotional cauldron of everything mixed in together. So don't feel free to, don't stop having that conversation. If there's something else that's bothering you, feel free to talk to any one of us at any point, okay?
Ranch girls basketball won 66-34. Just